All right, well, welcome back to Return to Yehovah. This is going to be part two, where I was discussing something, a rant of mine related to this idea that's out there that Yashua was not only crucified, but he was stoned with rocks or with sharp stones thrown at him while he was hanging on the cross. Now, the last video, and hopefully it'll be obvious which one is which. I'll try to put a link to the first one in this, and all that. But in that video, or in that, I discussed, that this article that I'm referring to, which I'm not promoting at all, but I'm more arguing about, these people, gave about 5 or 6 reasons why, Yeshua had to, they believe they could argue that he was stoned while he was hanging on the cross. And, it's just really set me off. But, okay, so for now, I'm going to try to address some of the points. If I can get through all of them in this video in time, I will. But, okay, the first couple points, they said, one, there had to be some reason why this healthy young man, Yeshua, died so quickly on the cross. And they said, he was, he should have been in good enough shape that he would have outlasted the 2 criminals. How they can, make that assumption, I don't know, other than, yeah, he walked all the time, and I have no reason to think he wasn't healthy, but, that's just somebody's assumption. And anyhow, again, this is all my opinion, but when I heard this, if you remember from the first video, it just really bothered me, and I felt like somebody needed to address this. Not to attack the writer of some article or even a book that might have led to the article or whatever, nor do I want to attack somebody who put it up on their website. Just, if you've come across this idea that he was stoned while he was hanging on the tree or on the cross, I don't agree with it. I think the Spirit of God in me got, to me, it's like the Spirit was like, no. I don't know if you've ever had that like red flag, like you maybe hear a preacher or somebody saying something about God and you just go, what? And you just know, because you know enough about the Word of God to go, that is not what the Bible teaches, or that just does not sound right at all, okay? I'm not going to give examples here, but anyhow, so the main thing, the first couple points revolved around thinking that he was too healthy. There's no way he should have been dead so quickly on the cross. Like as if even Pilate was shocked. I mean, they said that 3 or 4 times, how amazed that Pilate was that he was already dead. And I'm like, well, are we forgetting that he was fulfilling prophecy with everything he did on the cross? When he was buried, how he was buried, where he was buried, all those things. I'm not going to lay them all out because hopefully you guys have heard those by now, but even when he rose from the grave and when he did it, all that was on a specific, clock that God had. I mean, for, 1,500 years since Mount Sinai, when he gave the feasts, the commandments for the feast days to be kept by Israel throughout their generations forever. Passover was on a certain day and certain things had to be followed to make it kosher. This is just my word, but you know what I mean. To make it appropriate. And then the next day was a day of rest, and you had to do this and eat unleavened bread and, all those kind of things. And I'm not even talking about the multiple different sacrifices or offerings that went on when the temple was standing, but I'm talking about just the basic plan of salvation that was played out in the whole, really all of the spring feasts that Yeshua fulfilled with his death, burial, and resurrection. Okay, so somehow these people whoever wrote the book, and then the article that was quoted, and then the websites that put this stuff up there, somehow they're I guess agreeing with what these people said. And it's like, even if Pilate was shocked, who gives a darn, because God determined every bit of it. But hopefully you guys have heard. If not, I'll tell you now. When Yeshua, we've heard that it was a certain hour of the day and this, that, and the other. And it's been pretty well established that even though the Bible doesn't say it was 9 o'clock a.m. or 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever, you can tell from the wording that it was roughly 9 o'clock in the morning when he was nailed to the cross and the process started on the cross. And that was the time of the morning sacrifice in the temple, and always had been. And then when he died and was done on the cross as far as his life, that was at the time roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was the time of the evening sacrifice. Okay, and hopefully you've all heard that kind of stuff before, but if not, it kept to that particular schedule. But keep in mind, Passover, whenever it falls, the next day is always the 15th of that month. The very next day is always a Sabbath. Some like to call it a high Sabbath or a special Sabbath. And it's a day of rest. You're not supposed to work, and it's the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and so you're supposed to eat unleavened bread and all that. And keep in mind, Yeshua is called the bread from heaven. He came down from God, just like the manna in the wilderness. And, we know he is considered sinless before God, and he is unleavened, and these are not great revelations to most people nowadays. That believe in the Lord and are following him. Let's put it that way. You may not hear this in church all the time. I don't know. But anyhow, so in just these ways that I've mentioned already, Yeshua, was fulfilling prophecy or whatever. And as I said in another video earlier in the week or whatever, it was about the 3 days and 3 nights, what some people are calling the sign of Jonah. Okay, remember, Yeshua prophesied the only sign that was going to be given to that generation when he walked on the earth was the sign of Jonah, that as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man would be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, so we know that meant he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. It had to play out exactly that way, but also God intended him to be resurrected on a specific day, which would have been the day of first fruits, which would have been the day after the Sabbath. And in this case, it was a Sunday, the first day of the week. And so, again, God had planned this for, thousands of years or whatever. I mean, at least in our time. And so it was all mapped out. And I like to say this is like God's amazing tapestry where he's weaving it all together, and all the different lives that had to be connected to cause this all to come together. I mean, it's just incredible. Someday we'll get to understand that in the grand scheme or whatever. But so, for them to use the idea that, it was shocking that he was dead already, he was right on schedule. Everything he did, even up to his death, the words he said on the cross, the things where they tried to give him something to drink and he refused it because it was of the vine and things like that, and all of that stuff, that was him reciting from scripture sometimes and, fulfilling. I mean, they were gambling for his clothes, and he described that in the Tanakh before that. I'm sorry, I don't have those scriptures in front of me because this is a rant, okay? So, I'm just trying to argue, the points of things, not so much do a long teaching or anything like that, okay? But anyhow, hopefully that makes sense that he was fulfilling everything. So there's nothing surprising about how long it took him to die, okay? And to use that as part of your argument that he had to have something else happen to him to make him die so quickly. It's like, had they forgotten that he was up all night? I mean, when he was arrested, after he and the disciples had their Last Supper and all that, they were out in the garden. They had wine and food and all that stuff, and of course, he knew what was coming for him. He knew what he was going to be experiencing, but obviously they were all tired for whatever reason, because the disciples couldn't stay awake for even an hour to pray with him, remember? And 3 different times. But anyhow, when he was arrested, he had still been up. He didn't get to take a nap or whatever, and maybe he got to catch some sleep during that time, but it doesn't sound like it. I mean, he was kept up. It was like, late at night, they took him to, the house of the high priest, or the father-in-law of the high priest, and then, I don't know if it was the same place, but then they brought him before the high priest, and they, mocked him and, yelled at him, or, tried to dispute with him and all that stuff. Basically had him on trial, and then at some point, they took him to Pilate, and then one account says at least that they then transferred him to Herod, because he was from Herod's area, and so all these things are going on, and then he's brought back to Pilate, and he was going to release him and all that, and well, you know the story, and by all means, at this time of year, Passover time and all, read again the Gospels where it talks about Yeshua's, sacrifice. I mean, that's what we're to remember, at this time of year especially. And, but, like I say, he had gone through all that. Then he was beaten. We don't know the details exactly. I mean, some people have done the research on how the Romans did scourging, and I can't remember if it was, I had the name, but I lost it. Anyhow, there's a couple of different guys that had, Christian authors that had written books detailing how that worked, and unbelievable, some of the stuff they would do. And really, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but the Passion of the Christ movie that Mel Gibson did portrayed the same kind of things that I had read when people had gone back to the history of how the Romans did their scourging and all that stuff, to where pieces of bone or metal on these leather straps or whatever, and they would just whack it across the guy's back, and as they pulled it, these hooks or whatever, the sharp points would tear the skin and the flesh, and just unbelievable. I'm not saying that it definitely happened exactly as Mel Gibson portrayed in the movie. I don't know. Either way, it was horrible what Yeshua had to go through, but and we need to remember that every year, and really every day. But so after all that, then he's got to go carry the cross piece or whatever. And if you saw, well, anyhow, I won't get off on that, but so he would normally be expected to carry that off to wherever they were going to do the final crucifixion. Okay, so for him to have been, I mean, he'd been through a lot already, and he was on God's time clock, so there's no surprise at all that he died when he did. Yeah, it's just, that's just ludicrous, that argument. Okay, I'm going to call it for now on this video, and then I'll try to take up with some of the other points on this subject in the next one. So Yehovah bless you and keep you, and we'll be back in a little bit. Shalom.